Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Return to Work Employee Considerations. During this afternoon's presentation, please feel free to submit questions to the presenters using the GoToWebinar control panel. Our presenters will answer as many questions as they can at the end of the webinar, time permitting. Also, a copy and recording of this presentation will be made available this afternoon on our webinar event page and on Butzel Long's Coronavirus Resource Center on butzel.com. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar, Beth Godelf and Rebecca Davies. Beth?
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. I'd say it's good to see you, but obviously I'm not seeing you. But it's good to know all of you are there. And we have, as you know, I'm an attorney at Butzel Long, and I'm also the general counsel to the Michigan chapter of the National Association of Surface Finishers. And so welcome the MINASF and NASF members, because both the National NASF and MINASF are co-sponsoring this event today. And the reason that it came about is because we were getting a lot of questions on this topic. And so I said, you know what? It's time we have a free webinar on this so that we can tell a lot of our clients and association members, answer some of their questions before they even ask, or some they might not, they're thinking about this and they haven't quite thought everything through yet. So hopefully we'll give you a lot of tips on that. And then as Jonathan mentioned, afterwards, we'll answer some of your questions on that as well. And then if there's not time, if we don't finish all your questions before the end of the webinar, no fears, email us, give us a call. We're happy to answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Rebecca Davies, who is going to be doing the majority of the presentation. Rebecca is a shareholder at Butzel Long. She is a U of M grad, so some of you are going to be cheering for that. And she got her JD magna cum laude, so she's really smart, from the Detroit College of Law. And she's also gotten a master's from Wayne State in labor and employment law. So really, labor and employment is Rebecca. She has represented a number of different companies on this. She is a frequent author and lecturer, and I'm not going to go through a lot of that except to say that she has given a lot of talks at Welsh College, Michigan Chamber of Commerce, Automation Alley, and the American Society of Employers. And I mention that especially because for Welsh, she also is an adjunct professor. So she often speaks there. And she even has this really, there's this really neat monthly affinities group for human resource professionals that she facilitates, which I think is really a good asset for some of the HR people that are on the phone with us. She's active in, she's got a lot of nonprofits that she's active in both nationally and local. So I won't go into them except to tell you that she does serve on the board of the North American Transportation Employee Relations Association as a member of their Wage and Hour Defense Institute of the Litigation Council of America. So again, Rebecca has just a wealth of information when it comes to labor and employment, and somebody that I work quite a bit with on some of your issues. So many of you are already familiar with Rebecca, and Rebecca was one of our speakers on another recent webinar that we presented to you. So with that, I will turn it over to Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Beth, and thank you for your kind words. I appreciate our working relationship, and I thank you for the opportunity to come back and talk to your organization again. It is just amazing to actually consider that it's been almost or approximately 3 months since this pandemic hit Michigan and all the changes that have taken place since then. The good news is that with the executive orders in Michigan slowly opening up operations here, we are now facing a new set of challenges. The good news comes a little bad. We have to address the employment considerations, and that's what my goal is for today. I'm not going to tell you how to draft a preparedness plan. We have other seminars, materials we can give you that. I'm not going to talk about the executive orders in great detail unless they apply to employees. I want to talk about you took your precautions, you put up the plexiglass, you have your 6 feet of separation, you have your screening process in place, and what happens when an employee comes to you and asks you this or that? So these are our frequently asked questions that we have been receiving in these 4 areas: return to work concerns, safety, illness, and families first issues. I don't want to make you nervous or scare you, but I need to be realistic. The issue with respect to legal risk is not theoretical anymore. The wave of litigation regarding COVID has arrived, and it's a variety of different issues that are facing the employers today. First, the Department of Labor is regularly announcing different settlements it has been obtaining for employers that are failing to enforce or utilize the Families First, either the emergency paid sick leave or the extended FMLA. And so they are regularly publishing settlements they're getting on behalf of claimants regarding this. There's also many issues with respect to ADA. What we're finding out is that many of our employees had issues, disabilities, medical conditions that we were not aware of. And the reason we were not aware of is because it didn't affect their ability to perform the essential functions of their job before. However, because of the COVID pandemic, it might have exacerbated the condition or put them at greater risk. And so we're dealing with now a new host of ADA considerations that we weren't 6 months ago. Another issue that we have to address on the ADA front is the issue with respect to mental illness. It's not just physical illness. The statistics was that 1 in 5 experience mental illness each year. Since the COVID pandemic has hit, I've seen statistics that have raised that into 1/3 of all employees are experiencing some sort of mental illness. We also have a lot of FMLA issues that we're seeing to be addressed, that we're not considering the fact that there are serious health conditions that need to be accounted for and leave of absence being provided, or that for family members. There is also a risk, and the EEOC addressed this with respect to discrimination and harassment. Are we presupposing or regarding somebody as disabled without any request by the employee? Are we treating people differently simply because of their age? Or are we stereotyping based upon someone's national origin? There's been a lot of wage and hour violations. Some of the issues that we're seeing pop up is with respect to the incorrect treatment of exempt employees and not paying them for their full week as required under the salary basis test for the Fair Labor Standards Act. Other issues is not paying hourly employees for all hours worked, either through their telecommuting or telework, or now we're requiring them to screen and answer surveys before. Are we properly compensating for that? I would say the biggest issue of increased areas that we're seeing is with respect to safety, and that's going to go with respect to the OSHA, the public policy violations, and the NLRB charges. There are many employees have the right to, well, all employees have the right to file a complaint with OSHA, and many have if they do not believe that the company is providing the required equipment. One example is McDonald's recently had a suit filed against them because they were making their employees reuse gloves. Another, you've heard the 5-second rule, especially if you have children, right? If your food drops on the floor, you have 5 seconds to pick it up. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you could just roll your eyes at me right now, and I can't see, so go ahead. In McDonald's, they had a 10-minute rule, and what they were saying is that there's no need to physically distance if it was less than 10 minutes. So again, that was brought as a violation. We've seen many claims, lawsuits that are brought because they believe that their employer is violating the executive order and turning that into a public policy violation, as well as the ability to bring safety charges, terms and conditions of employment before the NLRB, or the ability to talk about the terms and conditions, that concerted activity that some employers are trying to stifle. And again, NLRB charges are resulting because of this. I share this with you at the beginning and spend so much time because the challenge is real, but the bigger challenge for you, I believe, is to make sure that your executive team, your management team recognizes the legal risks, because many companies want to just come back and do business as usual, and it's not. We need to be very sensitive to the various issues that we're addressing given the environment that we're working under. So let's start with some of the return to work considerations. The general question, the $69 million question is, well, is my employee required to return to work? You know, they're off on layoff, I call them back, are they required to return to work? I'm going to say yes, but as a good lawyer, I'm going to say, but with some notable exceptions. And I, say this a little tongue in cheek as to the exceptions, but what you're going to find out is basically the exceptions sometimes overtake the rule of yes. And I list these for you because I think that each and every inquiry is unique. And so you need to be looking at the specific unique situation while this employee is not coming back versus having a one-size-fits-all response. So you need to see, are you an employer with less than 500 employees and the Family First Act applies to you? So therefore, the employee might need to utilize leave under the emergency paid sick leave or the extended FMLA. Is there a possible FMLA time that could be provided? If so, that's unpaid generally. So is there any payment that could be made? Current use of PTO or short-term disability or workers' compensation? I had one client proactively contact their short-term disability carrier at the beginning of this pandemic to discuss waiving the waiting period for any COVID-related injuries. Obviously, there came at a cost, but again, it was a proactive measure to protect their employees. We also have to look at, are there any state, county, or local mandates interfering with their ability to return to work? In addition to the Families First various categories that we're going to go through, we have state orders that address that if an individual has had close contact with an individual who tests positive or displays one or more symptoms, there's a self-quarantine. Prior to June, there was various counties that had their own requirements. For specifically Oakland and Wayne County has rescinded those requirements, but we need to also be concerned about, are there any local restrictions? The ADA issue we need to consider is engaging in the interactive dialogue. Just because somebody says, I can't do this, and then you go, okay, well, they can't perform the essential functions, we're done, end of discussion. That should not happen. ADA is an interactive dialogue. If an employee comes to you and says, well, I can't do this because of this reason, okay, then you have a discussion with, well, is that an essential function or is it not? And if it's not an essential function, let's talk about what accommodation we could possibly use to allow you to perform the essential functions of your job. Let's be honest, when we talk about ADA issues, I think this is one of the most difficult issues for my clients. It's very difficult to identify what is the appropriate accommodation. And it's even worse in this new COVID environment. And so let's not try to go alone here. Let's get the input with respect to potential resources or accommodations from outside sources, including physicians. You also have to find, before you say that the employee is required to return to work, whether they have any other company policy leave time, including paid medical leave, which is under state law. Michigan provides 40 hours of sick time for employers that have 50 or more employees. Now, that could be in the form of PTO or vacation, but we need to make sure that that has been offered to our employees. And then if we go through all of these, we go through those 5 different categories, and we still don't have our answer, then we got to look at what are we going to do as a company? Are we going to give them an unpaid leave of absence? And if so, how is this going to affect other issues? At that time, are we going to say, well, we're going to be able to continue your insurance, or is this going to be a qualifying event that's going to require them to apply for COBRA? Is this going to be something that they possibly could obtain unemployment for? We obviously recognize that the standards for unemployment are very broad given the pandemic. And then we need to have a conversation with our employees. Yeah, you know what? You don't have any of these leave entitlements available, but we're going to put you on an unpaid leave of absence. We're not going to terminate your employment, but we're going to be honest. When you return and your job is not available, or there's not a substantially equivalent job available, right? You don't have any restoration rights. So we need to be very clear, and we go through that, all these different factors when deciding whether the employee can come back or can we take action if as a result of it. Now, the one that we see often, too often, is what if the employee refuses to come in because they are making more money through unemployment? I'm not sure if you heard about this, but the federal government is giving an additional $600 kicker to unemployment, and therefore that is incentivizing some employees to stay home, because at the end of the day, they can make up to $24.05 per hour by staying at home, which in many circumstances may be more than they're making at your position. So we are seeing a lot of pushback with respect to employees not wanting to return to work, and some are being honest with respect to, hey, I'm making more money because of unemployment. If that's the case, you need to have a conversation with them. First of all, you want to document in writing the return to work request. Why? Why do we want it in writing? Well, we want to be able to have proof to the unemployment office later that we made an offer of employment and they refused to come back. Okay. And if the employee refuses, we want to advise them that they may not be entitled to unemployment. Now, let's be honest, we do not want to threaten our employees that they're not going to receive this. We're not in that position to do that, and we can't speak on behalf of a state agency. But instead, we're going to advise them, how are we going to respond when we get that unemployment inquiry? And that there is a position open for you, but you have refused to come. We also will address the issue with respect to insurance. Now, when we had many people off on layoffs and or furloughs, and we were continuing their insurance. So they were getting both compensation through unemployment as well as insurance. Well, if they refuse to come back, I assume we're not going to continue their insurance. And that turns a different picture with respect to how lucrative this unemployment compensation is when you have to pay your own monies for COBRA. So we need to have a conversation about what we're going to do for insurance purposes. And then, as I discussed before, the restoration and rehire rights, that we don't have the obligation to keep that job open for you. Another particular issue that we're seeing is that what if the employee is fearful to return? Now, the answer to this is, again, case-by-case situation, and it's giving you both practical as well as legal advice. The first part is that you want to be empathetic. You know, this pandemic hits people in many different ways that we couldn't even imagine, and we need to be empathetic to how this is affecting your particular employee. But you need to discuss your company's safety measures. You have to let them know. You have worked so hard in making sure your facility is ready and safe for them to return, right? By cleaning, disinfecting, staggering shifts, changing the physical layouts. Okay, make sure you share your efforts, what you have done early and often with your employees so they can recognize and appreciate that. It's not necessarily that you're just trying to brag, oh, I've been working so hard while you've been at home. No, it's because we care about your safety and this is what we're doing to protect you. Let them know. For instance, one company, before they returned, gave their employees a virtual tour. See, look at all the changes that we have made. One, to hopefully avoid some of the fear and anxiety of the return, but to also have them prepared as to how the workplace is going to look different when they return. So they understand the actions being taken by the company. Describe.
Now,
Yeah,
this is Beth, and another example is some people are doing extra cleaning. Not only do they have whatever company normally does it or their staff does it, but then if their staff normally does it, at night they're having company come and do more disinfectant. Or if they already had somebody outside doing the disinfectant, then they have people in their company assigned just to do cleaning. Or you'll see people who touch the certain points, the bathrooms, the door handles, etc. They do nothing but go around and clean those. And so by those are things you might want to think about doing. And also by telling your employees about, these steps that you're taking, they'll see that you're more serious. And for example, we're drifting a little bit, face masks. You're going to tell them that you require them to wear face masks. Have management go around, make sure that they're wearing their masks. And that way, because some people get upset when others aren't taking it seriously. And when they see that management's taking it seriously, you're saying a good example for not only the employees who are willing to wear those face masks or willing to come into work, but those who are very fearful as they do come into work.
those are all great points,
Yeah.
and that we're sharing that with our employees. These are all the steps we're taking. And to that point, though, is that getting them, they're asking them for their input if they have any other recommended suggestions to help the safety. With respect to the management being the leader, as Beth described, I think that's really important for those organizations that have been open for a while, like for our manufacturing companies that have been, have now 4 weeks under their belt. Sometimes things will get a little relaxed. And although the numbers in Michigan, at least, have been declining, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're out of risk, or it hasn't changed the lack of treatment or vaccine that we have for this. So we need to still be diligent, not just the first day, week, or month, but a continuous effort towards that. To that point, we want to be able to describe to them why we want them back. That telework was a short-term solution and we can't continue this. But also talk about your company's record. If this is worth bragging about, talk about the limited cases, no cases since a particular date, no hospitalizations. Let your employees know so that infamous they in their ear doesn't override them. Because the social media, the 24/7 news cycle, that has a lot of influence. And so you have a very difficult task on your hand to counteract that. You also need to find out what is the real specific issue for their concern. So if you have this dialogue regarding the safety considerations and the reasons, let's get to the bottom of why they're fearful. And there's a big difference between saying I am fearful or I'm having anxiety attacks. Right? Anxiety attacks now all of a sudden triggers into a medical issue. And then we might need to be talking about ADA, FMLA. Okay. So we need to get to the root of the issue that we're seeing. And be consistent with your approach and response. That you've set the standards regarding not allowing or allowing, putting people off on unpaid leave of absence. One of the difficult issues that we find out is that what if the employee discloses to you now that he or she has a compromised immune system? Well, again, now we're looking at going through the ADA interactive dialogue to find out if he or she needs accommodations and what those accommodations could look like. Are we looking for a different mask? Are we looking for a different protection for facial covering? Are we talking that maybe we need a plastic face shield instead? Or are we talking that none of this is going to work and that, you know, the person has asthma or something else and another condition and that they can't come to work anymore and we have to telecommute, okay? Working from home or putting on a leave of absence is an accommodation under the ADA. But before we jump to that, let's get the physician involved. Let's get the physician involved to say, dear doctor, this employee is required to do A, B, and C in this type of environment. Given their current medical condition, are there accommodations that we can provide as an employer that will allow him or her to perform the essential functions of the job? And always recognize that a leave of absence. So there is some issues with respect to when the employee, him or her actually themselves have a compromised immune system. And one of the issues is that this could possibly be covered by FMLA. We don't know if it is or is not. And so possibly STD. That's not for us to decide whether that is appropriate or not. Instead, what I say is basically we're handing out FMLA and STD forms like candy. If there's an issue that somebody's raising and I'm not sure how this is going to affect it, let's give them those certifications. Put the ball in their court to address, yes, I do need a leave of absence and I can get that certification, versus us assuming that this would not be a qualifying reason. Just give them the forms and let them fill this out. Or is there an issue with respect to families first? Did a physician order the employee to self-quarantine? Okay, and let's say that they did. It's not for us to question whether a physician's motives on this. If there is, then we're going to follow that. I don't think we should be as HR professionals in a position to question it or a second opinion. Now let's address issues with respect to specific safety. One of the issues that we receive on a regular basis is that, well, the employees are not sure how we're going to keep them safe. So how are you going to communicate that message, right? If an employee asks you, well, what are you going to do? You know, the only thing that's changed between today and a month ago is that the state lifted the stay-at-home restriction, but that doesn't mean the pandemic has gone away. So what employer are you going to do that's going to keep me safe? And so this is where you need to be prepared to have that dialogue and conversation, that you are going to explain that you are following the state requirements. Specifically, as we sit here on June 17th, which is Executive Order 114 that addresses a safeguard to protect workers. And it has the general requirements for all workers as well as specific requirements for industries. Specific industries have to do additional things. We're going to talk about the county requirements that we're following. If we do business in more than one county, we need to make sure that we look at the specific county requirements because they are all not the same. If you haven't spent time on your county's resource website, by all means do so. There's some really great materials out there. Kent County has a back to work website. Oakland County, for small employers under 50, have return to work kits for employers. As well as looking at whether there's any city requirements, such as required testing. And then finally, we're looking for the CDC guidelines. As you know, these requirements change often. And so you have to be vigilant to make sure that you are following the most recent requirements. For instance, with respect to face coverings. I remember when I traveled back in the early March, they opined that you don't need to wear a mask. That's not going to help you. Go on that plane. You don't need that, right? And now face coverings are required. And in Michigan, under our executive order, if you can't maintain a separation of more than 6 feet at the business, you should be wearing a face covering. If you cannot maintain a separation of more than 3 feet, it's a face covering plus face shield. Okay? And those are required to be provided by the employers to the employees. You have to worry or be concerned with respect to isolation periods. If somebody's sick, how long are they required to be out? Because that standard has varied along the way. As we sit here today, the executive order says 3 days, 7 days. You have to be symptom free for 3 days and 7 days since it began, versus the CDC has a 3-day and 10-day requirement. Okay. We have to communicate our efforts to our employees early and often and be open to adapt and improve. So what do we mean by that? You know, we are trying to learn as much safety precautions as possible to protect our employees, but let's welcome their advice. You know, do we have a suggestion box for them? Do we give them an award for giving us, you know, giving us recommendations of items or products that we could be using that would make us better employer? So let's give safety awards. Let's give bonuses for suggestions. Let's reward everyone. And speaking of rewarding, that's the issue that we have with respect to will everyone wear a mask, and what happens if an employee refuses? So this is what I would like to do with respect to this issue. This is not a spectator sport. I thought if you thought you're going to come on the webinar and not have to participate, I'm going to make you work here. What I would like to find out from you, all the attendees, so we can learn from each other collectively, is what are your creative ways that you're using to encourage an employee to wear a mask? Obviously, there's the punitive measures, the discipline, the sending, the home, but do you have any program or saying or incentive that you're giving your employees to do this very important safety measure? And if so, would you be willing to share it? So if you could add in the chat room what you're doing to encourage masks, and I think then the rest of us will learn from that and we'll be able to learn from each other. Beth?
Yeah, are you having contests maybe of, you know, who can come up with the most creative or decorative type, or, you know, just various things? Because a lot of people have called us and said, my employees just don't want to wear these masks, or I can't keep them on. And so, yes, we walk through the floors regularly to make sure they're wearing them. But what else can you do to make it more fun for them and interesting? So it'd be interesting to share those tips with each other.
Now think about it. Last summer, you were concerned with everybody's summer dress code and whether somebody was wearing inappropriate clothes or flip-flops. Heck, those seem like easy problems now, right? So now we went from the dress code police to the safety police. And this is different consequences versus a dress code violation. And when we talk about following all the requirements, I try to set them forth, but let's look at the resources that are getting provided. There's videos on how to properly put on a mask, how to make a mask. And indeed, the state executive order requires us to give training to employees with respect to this use and the importance of it. We also want to address the possible need for accommodations. The state order says if medically tolerable. So what happens if an employee cannot use a mask for a long period of time because of an underlying medical condition? What are you doing to address this? And that could trigger some accommodation requirements. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to demonstrate or communicate to your employees the why for the safety precaution. Okay. And with respect to that, if you're here not just to protect this one employee or make one employee comfortable, and you know, I know your glasses fog up and I know it's itchy and I know after a while it's uncomfortable, but you know, we're here to protect not only you as our employee, but our entire workforce. And you're not going alone on this. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has issued a guide regarding face coverings. So share this other information you're receiving by state and federal resources as to the requirements or the importance of it. And so it's not looking like it's the company that's requiring this, but the importance for other sources. And then be consistent with your approach and response. And as Beth said, many people have called us and said, well, what do we do? And this is where you're going to have to really draw that line in the sand and say, this is a bigger issue. Here we have to, this is a safety consideration for all of our employees. And we're going to have to strictly enforce it. So be ready to do so. And there is no exception of, well, that's the boss or that's the boss's child, right? There's also the issue with whether you can ask the employees about symptoms and health information. 6 months ago, if you had this issue, I would say no. You're not allowed to ask anybody about their health information, because why? That is an ADA violation, and we're not judging people's performance or ability to perform based upon their medical information. But given the unique situation of a pandemic, the EEOC has allowed this. And indeed, the state has required this in that it requires a daily screening. Do you have a temperature? Do you have a cough? And all the other symptoms that have been associated with COVID-19. So not only can you, but in the state of Michigan, you're required to do with that screening. Okay. And not only the screening, but it has to be done daily, and it has to be kept by the employer. So you want to make sure that you're doing it consistently, that you're making everyone do it, that you're maintaining the records confidentially. You want to make sure you're treating them just like any other medical information. So this is not access to everyone. Even in handed application with respect to this, no discrimination, and we're not making decisions by facts and not stereotypes. One of the related issues regarding screening is regarding the ability to pay for that time. So for our hourly workforce, we need to address, are we compensating our employees for this time that it takes to undergoing the screening process? Now remember, I'm still looking for your input with respect to what are your best practices or suggestions regarding masks. So I know that some of you are having some great programs out there. Please share it with us. One of the companies that I'm familiar with, we're all familiar with the fire chant of stop, drop, and roll. They use the phrase stop, drop, and disinfect. You guys are creative. Let me know what you guys are doing so we can share that with others. The next issue we have is, can you take temperatures? And again, before the pandemic, this would have been prohibited because this would have been seen as an impermissible medical inquiry by the EEOC. But the EEOC has changed that answer given the pandemic and is deferred to the federal health department or the federal officials, the CDC, regarding this. And the executive order here in Michigan recommends this for all companies that are operating, and in fact requires it for some companies such as manufacturing. So we're all familiar with the fact that we can do it. The question is, are we doing it appropriately? And that's where I want to kind of focus our time on. The issue is, you're going to have to figure out where you're going to do it. Are you doing this before entry? Are you doing the 6 feet separation? Is it being administered by one person? And for the person who's doing the screening, are you providing them PPE? Are you giving them gowns, masks, gloves? Do you have a system in place so you know exactly what you're going to do with respect to a particular issue? What happens when somebody has a temperature that's 100.4 or above? Are you going to send them home, allow them to test again? What is your standard? What are you going to do? Are you ensuring consistency to make sure that you're not treating some people differently? Are you paying the employee for the time spent taking the temperature or engaging in screening, ensuring the 6 feet lineup, social distancing? And then let's be honest, you have to be prepared for proactively addressing the morale issue involved in this. Well, if it's so safe, then why do we have to do this, right? Well, we have a safe environment, but we're trying to do this to avoid anybody with potential, not saying you necessarily have COVID, but potential symptoms that are similar to COVID. Because it goes to the last point of, just because you have a fever does not necessarily mean you have COVID. And just because you don't have a fever does not necessarily mean you don't have COVID either. So these are not all dispositive, but again, associated with the COVID-19. We then evolved to the issue in the last 3 months of whether we can actually tell an employee to go get tested. Go to your healthcare provider and get the COVID test. And again, before pandemic, this would not have been allowed under by the EOC. Impermissible medical inquiry be prohibited by the ADA. But given the pandemic situation, yes, you're allowed to do that. So you as an employer, you got the green light to do this. Are you going to? Okay. And if so, under what circumstances? Are you going to require everybody to undergo a test before they return to work after you didn't get called back from a furlough or layoff? Are you going to maybe make it only necessary if an employee is demonstrating symptoms? Then you need to go get tested. The ability to test and under what circumstances is up to the employer. The important part is that you just have to be consistent with respect to what rules you're going to apply. And to that point, you want to make sure that you're only obtaining a viral test, not an antibody test for it. And you want to make sure that just because you're getting tested doesn't mean you're done. You still have to make sure that you are using the appropriate infection controls, okay, that of cleaning, disinfecting to protect your employees. Okay. And then finally, what happens if an employee actually tests positive, right? Or they have symptoms in their testing? Well, then that might trigger the families first. So there's some issues for that. There's a state website on the slide that if you're not familiar with where the employee can go get tested, there is different issues, okay? So the other issues that we receive with respect to frequently asked COVID questions is, will I get time off or get paid if I get sick? And we kind of addressed all of these when we were kind of going through our little question as to what the person might be entitled to. And so again, this is just kind of, these are potential avenues for payment or time off if an employee gets sick. The family first, the FMLA, your company paid policies, non-FMLA leave of absence or unpaid leave of absence that you want to address. Now, what happens if someone in my family gets sick and I have to care for them? Unfortunately, this is a difficult question. It might be covered, and I stress only possibly covered under the families first, if it's under the fourth category that you're actually caring for somebody who's been advised to self-quarantine or isolate pursuant to a healthcare order. Okay, and if so, then you would have to document the relationship of the person you're caring for and the government or the healthcare provider that ordered that. It might be possible that this is a serious health condition and you as they as your dependent, you need to provide them care. Okay, that might be it. But short of those two, there isn't really any general caring for someone else. And I'm sure you get a variety of cases that somebody comes to you, well, I have a sick parent, or I have a sick child, or I have, you know, the compromised immune system of a child. So what do I do? So that's when you're really going to have to talk about the flexibility and your non-FMLA or your other leave of absence policies that you can possibly provide. The other issue that we see is, what happens if my coworker gets sick? How will I know? Well, you're going to be performing the CDC and state obligations regarding performing a risk assessment, figuring out who that employee has been in contact with. And then based upon those that there has been that contact, that exposed period of time within 6 feet for more than 10 minutes, right? We're advising them to self-quarantine for 14 days since the last day of exposure and to monitor their symptoms. But we're not telling anybody's name. We're not saying, oh, Sally, right? Sally has been tested positive, right? No, because that's an ADA violation. Instead, we're going to say somebody that you had a contact with has been tested, and this is what we're going to do. Another requirement required by the state governor in our executive order is to also notify the local health departments, who at first was like, don't tell us. The CDC recommended that, don't call us, but now we have been able to learn to plan to address this. And if you ever call the county health department, there's a specific press 1 if you have this, press 2. So they are welcoming employers to call them so they can address that. Finally, I want to end our interesting discussion regarding Families First. This came into effect of April 1st. You might have received the basic information at that time, but you went on furlough or you went layoff, and now you get all these employees coming back and they keep saying, well, what about this? Or I want this time off. I want to make sure that we understand the benefits that are provided under Families First and how this would apply to your workforce. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but I wanted to first give you the eligibility requirements and also point out the irony that to get the unpaid leave, you have to be there more than to actually be there to get the paid leave. For FMLA expansion, you only have to be there for 30 days, and emergency paid sick leave, you don't even have to be there for a period of time. Okay. Also, I want to also emphasize this is an and requirement. Prior to jumping to the third row of they're caring for someone else, or they're subject to self-quarantine, or they have symptoms and seeking medical treatment, before you're addressing to one of those reasons, you want to make sure that the employee is unable to work or telework. So maybe they are caring for someone. If they're still able to telework, then this would not apply. And then I also wanted to show you the similarity of the reasons between the FMLA expansion as well as the emergency paid sick leave. And there is an overlap of the reasons for caring for a minor child because of this child's school or place of care is closed due to COVID. And so that is the specific issue. Are you closed because of COVID? And that's what we have to address. Now, with respect to the rates or how much we received under extended FMLA, the first 2 weeks are technically unpaid, but you could use your PTO, or the employee has the ability to take the emergency paid sick leave, which would still be at the 2/3 rate, capped at $200. And then the remaining 10 weeks would be, again, at the 2/3 rate, capped at $200 per day. On the other hand, the emergency paid sick leave is a basically 2-week full-time 80-hour entitlement. If one of these 6 areas are present, and then the Department of Labor has indicated they have no idea what that 6th category is of conditions specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and I'm hoping that we never find out what that is. But what I want to emphasize in the different colors in the slide, and use these charts for you to assist you, is that there's a different rate depending on the reason. So if it's care for yourself, you're subject to quarantine, you've been advised, you experience symptoms, then you get your full rate. If you're caring for someone else, quarantine, child care, then you're only at a 2/3 rate. So all time paid under the emergency paid sick leave is not created equal. There are 2 different rates. Our example is pretty easy here. An employee who has been diagnosed with COVID, cannot work from home, would get the first 2 weeks up to 80 hours under the emergency paid sick leave at their full regular rate. It's a cap at $511 a day, and so it'd be 80 hours at $3,000. There's 2 things you need to do. You need to, 1, document the reason for it. That's an HR function. And then 2, you need to code this correctly in your payroll system so you can later get the tax credit. Okay, so that would be your accounting or payroll system. Now school has ended. School is out for the summer. So what happens when it ends and the employee will still need the time off? Well, the extended FMLA talks about school closure or childcare services not being available due to COVID. So if I had a child under 14 that I took the leave for and their school just got out done Friday, I would have been under the school closure. Now come Monday, I now have to show that I have the inability to send to childcare because of a COVID related event. So you now then document that specific reason for the second. Okay, so you want to make sure you're identifying all these areas indicated here, the name of the child, the place that's being closed due to COVID. Most importantly, they need to certify there's no other suitable person. So what does that mean? That means if your spouse is home too, you're not eligible, right? Because they could be caring for the person, unless of course the spouse is sick or unable to care for them, okay? And then have this signed by the employee. To demonstrate how these two can overlap and can be used together, I gave the example of an employee who's off because of childcare reasons. So the first 2 weeks would be they could elect to use the emergency paid sick leave. They get it at 2/3 rate. And then the next 10 weeks, they then go under the expanded FMLA for 10 weeks, 2/3 rate. Okay. Employee only gets 2/3. So what about the 1/3? What can you do? The employer can actually require the employee to use their PTO for the remaining 1/3. And why would you do that? Because some employers are like, well, they get this 12 weeks off for this, and then they're going to get additional time for PTO. So that would kind of limit their ability to take additional time off when they return. One of the biggest issues we receive regarding Families First is the issue with respect to intermittent leave. Intermittent leave is an option, not a requirement. So that means that you as the employer must agree. If there's an agreement to use it intermittently, confirm it in writing and include the time increment. Are you going to do this on a daily basis, a half day, an hourly basis, but be consistent? Okay. But the important part is that if the person is reporting to work, intermittent leave is only when you need to take care of your child because of lack of childcare. It's not when somebody's sick, because the purpose of the Families First is to keep people who are sick away from the workplace. So if you if you are reporting to work, but I need to come back and forth to take care of my child, you're then exposing your other employees to that. So if the person's sick or caring for somebody sick, intermittent leave would not be allowed because, again, it's to keep it away from the workplace. Okay. Now, one of the issues we have is that what happens if an employee, can they take the Families First if they are off on unemployment? And the answer is generally no. These two do not work together. They are mutually exclusive. And let's talk about how the difference is. A very simple rule of thumb is employment is for inactive employees, okay, for former employees, laid off, furloughed, terminated. Okay, so the governor issued the stay home, stay safe order. It shut down your business. Your employee went off on, they could no longer report because your business was closed, right? There was no job available. Okay, so even if they qualified for Families First, because you didn't have a job available for them, we weren't using Families First. But now here we go, that stay has been lifted. You're now resuming operations. They can come back. And now they say, I'm unable to come back for one of the eligible reasons. Now we're looking to take care of it. Okay. And then very quickly, I want to go through some other issues that we receive with respect to Families First. Can you take the emergency paid sick leave for 2 different reasons? For instance, I would had to self-quarantine for that I had symptoms before, but I didn't necessarily take it all, you know, or I got a negative test result and I came back and then there was a different reason. The answer is yes, you can take it for 2 different reasons up to a maximum of 80 hours. Okay, a maximum of 80 hours, and that includes even if you switch employers, believe it or not. Is there a 12-week cap for FMLA and extended FMLA? And the answer is yes. You have a 12-week entitlement. So we're using that rolling period generally, looking at these combined cannot exceed 12 weeks. But your emergency paid sick leave is not necessarily deemed a family medical leave event. So therefore, those 2 weeks are not included in that 12-week entitlement. So if the person did not use the first 2 weeks as their unpaid time under the extended FMLA, but instead used it earlier because of somebody sick or themselves sick, and then later needed the 12 weeks, ultimately employee could get up to 14 weeks under the Families First. Can you require an employee to use the PTO to cover the difference in time? We talked about that already. The answer is yes. The 2/3 is entitled to FFCRA, and then you can require the employee to use the PTO time from the employee. And then what happens if the employee cannot give the supporting documentation? The good news is that we don't have all the specific requirements under the FMLA. The bad news is we don't have all the specific requirements under the FMLA. You know, that was a 15-day requirement that they had to provide for it. You need to be reasonable. We've seen in one case, the DOL has proffered that you have a reasonable time period up to 5 days to get it. So I wouldn't necessarily decline that because they don't have it prior to that. I'd give them an opportunity to provide that. In a follow-up with them. We have a few minutes left. Beth, I want to turn it over to you and then we can go to some questions and answers.
Okay, yes, thank you, very informative. You know, one thing that I want to mention to you, Rebecca talked a little bit about preparedness plans, preparedness and response plans. That has been a topic of other webinars. You can look on our website for those. And also we just did one for the Better Business Bureau, actually, which I'm on their board. And so the Better Business Bureau has one listed on theirs that we gave. And as I said, we have some on Butzel.com. And then if you check the COVID, you'll see a little tab of COVID. Just click on that and that will direct you to it as well. So we can respond to that. You know, some of you have come up with a few creative things with face masks and how to encourage people. One is a scavenger hunt, essentially. And what it is an employee was willing to make the masks, but needed material, needed elastic and 3/4 quarter elastic. They needed some either wire from florals, if you make floral arrangements, or pipe cleaners for the nose. And so people who would bring that in, and then the employee would make the face masks, and then people got to choose which ones they wanted. And then they had a couple so they could have one wash and have one. So that was kind of a fun thing for all of them. And of course, you know, the men had some interesting materials and such that they brought in or wanted some old shirts, etc., that they liked the pattern. So that was one idea, just to make it a game and fun. And I've mentioned to you before is that they have contests. Those are always something that's popular. It is 2:58. We will take a couple quick questions here before we hang up. So we'll go just a couple minutes after. And I've mentioned the preparedness and response plans. And one of the questions is that you are required to have those in Michigan when you start back up. And the question is, do you have to file them with the state? Rebecca, you want to take that one?
There is no requirement to file that. Instead, you have to have that available to your employees. So are you going to be, is it going to be in paper form? Is it going to be on the internet? Make sure you communicate to your employees and customers, or you've seen it on people's websites as well, that this is available for the employees to review. But no, there is no quote unquote filing requirement.
You know, and it's a good question. When you work on your plans, think about it. You have different areas. A lot of you have production, one area that's production, and then another area that's office. So obviously people in the office can eat at their desk instead of the cafeteria. People on the plant floor can't do that. So you're going to have to be sensitive and think about how to be creative on that, and understand your different areas. I know we have a couple government entities on the phone, and we also have some entities that do multiple things. So they have offices, they have customers that come in and out, and then they have behind the backstage type of operations. And so each of those areas, you need to have consistency. You need to treat everybody, no discrimination. And you need to treat them all fairly, but you also have to be sensitive to the different areas that people are in. Another question is about temperatures. So Rebecca was clear to say you can take temperatures now, it's allowed. But the question is, are you required to take the temperatures? Rebecca, I'll let you do that.
Here in Michigan, it is recommended, and it's only required thus far in a manufacturing context. So only, and that's if they can get a touchless available. So if you're in the process of ordering and never got it, then you could use that maybe as your excuse for at least temporary. But manufacturing, it's required. All other businesses, it is recommended, not required.
And that's another thing. It kind of leads to the daily screening. And, what do you do? You are required to daily screen. There are different techniques of daily screening. Some people have apps on their phone now where the employees complete them, or there might be somebody at the door who keeps an electronic list of it or has the questions and they complete it, or some have just pieces of paper and each person fills out the piece of paper and then signs it before they come in. There's a variety. Is there any requirements? Does it have to be? Are you required to keep these written or keep records of it? What
the executive order in Michigan doesn't identify what form you keep it. But it does require you to keep the daily screening requirements. So we have the executive order that says you must keep that information. And then we also have the ADA obligations that talk about medical information must be kept confidential. So we want to make sure we're maintaining, not only are we keeping it to comply with the governor's order, but we're maintaining the confidentiality to comply with our ADA obligations.
Okay. There's a couple questions concerning, we have employees that are tested for COVID for various reasons. One could be because when they came in, they weren't feeling well, and so you sent them to get tested. Others because a family member or them came in contact with somebody who tested positive, so they leave, they get tested, they're home for however many days it takes until they get their results. And then after that, they test negative. So the question is do they still get paid for those days they were home and they were negative?
Wow, this one's a difficult question. Let's break this down. The question is that I'm going to first start, are they entitled to Families First? And Families First is that you are entitled to emergency paid sick leave if you tested positive or if you have symptoms and you sought medical treatment. And so under that second category, they may be titled under Families First. But the hypothetical that you described is that then they went and got tested and it's negative. So are you required them to come back? Well, we know there's an incubation period, and we know that there is a self-quarantine period for so many days after the symptoms. So we would need to be addressing whether they have completed the isolation period under the state order of 3 days since the last day they had symptoms, 7 days from the first date. So there could be a possible leave of absence requirement just under the state order. Not necessarily paid, right? If this is, we've already exhausted our Families First. But again, there's that protection that the state order has provided regarding symptoms. And we also have issues with respect to exposure. I have been exposed. Well, just because you drove down a street and maybe somebody who was jogging by you, may had COVID does not necessarily mean you're exposed. So these are difficult conversations and very facts intensive that you need to have with your employees to address. Do they receive the protections for a leave of absence, albeit on an unpaid basis, under the state order regarding isolation, self-quarantine, or exposure for 14 days. So you need to specifically address those as well.
You did a great job answering that when I combined multiple questions into one to save time because we were already past 3 o'clock. So good for you, Rebecca. Thank you. And for everyone else, so we are past 3 o'clock. It's 3:05. You have in front of you the number, our names, emails, and our phone numbers. So please feel free to reach out and give us a call or email us if you have any other follow-up questions. And also check out our website. It really, it's great. It has lots of information for you because we're trying to get everybody through this interesting time that we live in. And with that, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you very much, and we appreciate you all joining us.